Have you been told you need to stop doing what you love, whether it's exercise, running, or a sport? Well, here at Dynamic, we don't like that answer. In this podcast, we'll talk to leaders in the health and wellness space from Southwest Florida to get the solutions you need to get you back to doing what you love. Welcome to the Dynamic Naples Podcast. What's going on in Southwest Florida? Today, I want to talk about one of my favorite quotes and sort of some of the paradigm shifts that are happening in healthcare. So the quote goes something like, "A ship at rest is safe, but that's not what it's meant to do." So I think this quote really demonstrates the sort of shift in the thinking in healthcare and general wellness. I'll get deep into that in a minute. It's common to hear healthcare practitioners make analogies of the human body to a car. And sometimes that's helpful, and I do that too for certain situations. But there is a big difference between us and a car. So, and this kind of goes into the wear and tear model, which I think is bullshit, by the way. So wear and tear happens to mechanical things like cars. Use a car, maybe the tires wear out. That just happens with time. The difference between our bodies and that is our bodies have the ability to adapt, right? So if we use things, they don't just wear out. It depends on how you use them, how much, and if you do it the right way, it'll become stronger and a better machine overall. So this goes into the idea of homeostasis and hormesis, which I'll explain better. So homeostasis is the body's ability to sort of stay balanced, to find neutral, right? It's always seeking to do that. And things that you can do to your body will throw it off homeostasis, and then it'll eventually recenter back to sort of neutral. So if you're just sitting on your couch and you're a total couch potato and you're not doing anything, you're in homeostasis most likely. And you probably don't have any pain. But if you go and try to lift something heavy, you might push your body too much for what it can handle, and then you're in a world of hurt. All right. So the idea here is to push homeostasis, to rock the boat. If you can lift 50 pounds off the floor with no issues, great. But the moment, if that's all you've ever done, and you go to lift 200 pounds off the ground, that's where you tend to run into trouble. So this goes into what's called the eustress distress model. So eustress is a stress that you apply to your body that you can recover from. Distress means you've pushed past your threshold, and now you've created injury or some sort of tissue damage. With eustress, you recover, meaning you've maybe pushed your body to its limit, maybe just above it, and then what happens is the body comes back being stronger and able to tolerate more. So you've now pushed your threshold of that eustress distress model a little bit higher, so you've developed more of a buffer. One of the problems is that, and I think this just goes into the way our brains are wired to think yes or no, 1 or 0, good or bad, right? Like, are eggs good or bad? Is red wine good or bad for your heart? There's so many examples of this, and with everything, the answer is it depends, and there's a lot of nuance, right? It's the same can be said for exercise, picking up loads, all these things. There is nuance to it. So the fallacy is that this linear dose response sort of chart is how our bodies work. That's more how a car works. That goes into what wear and tear is. Our bodies really respond differently. It's more of like a U-shaped curve or a J-shaped curve. If you've heard of the area under the curve, this is what I'm talking about, that the right amount of stress applied to the body is adaptive and therefore beneficial. This type of thinking has led to lots of these relics from the past that need to go away, such as deadlifting is bad for your back, squatting is bad for your knees, you should never have your knee translate past your toes. That's all been debunked. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there still saying that because of this sort of logical fallacy of this linear response to dose. So if you come to see me as a patient and your back hurts, you're going to end up doing some deadlifts. It might not look like that at first. It might work on some hinging, and then picking up light things off the ground and progressively get the back stronger and stronger. That's what's going to protect your back. Same thing with knees. You're going to end up squatting. This is the way to move forward in your life. And this goes into that quote. You got to expose yourself to things to become what you're meant to do. Now, here's where it gets kind of fun. So far, I've been basically talking about exercise. So there's lots of different ways to apply stress to the body. I just actually finished up a course from Dr. Mike T. Nelson, who's brilliant. His course is called Physiologic Flexibility, and that's kind of what I'm talking about here. And he picked out 4 sort of main homeostatic levers that you can kind of mess around with and create a better threshold or a better window with which your body can move and handle. So the 4 homeostatic levers are pH levels, so your acid-base scale, your CO2 to oxygen ratio, your blood glucose, and temperature. So let's say temperature. That one's a pretty easy one. And this kind of goes into why I love ice baths so much. So the majority of us, life has gotten real cushy. We live in air-conditioned houses. We get into our AC car, go to the gym that's climate controlled, go to your office that's climate controlled. If you're in Florida, it's like the only heat you're really getting exposed to is moving from home to car to in between spaces, which is not very much. So we generally live in this like nice, comfy 74 to 77 degree climate. And then we're confused when we go up north to visit somebody maybe, and it's a little colder, 50 degrees out, and suddenly you get a cold. Your body's not ready to handle that because you haven't exposed it to stuff. That's how we evolved to be in cold and warm climates to be able to handle that. So you can start to mess around with these things, and just like deadlifting, it's a kind of a progressive overload. So you could start going into a sauna, maybe a couple minutes a day, or jump into ice bath a couple minutes a day. You start playing with these levers of homeostasis, and then you create more of a window, and you become a better machine. Here's the really cool thing about all this, is that there is a crossover effect, a cross adaptation. So let's take breathing, for example. Your ability to hold your breath is really an indicator of how much you can tolerate the buildup of CO2 in your bloodstream. That's what happens. CO2 starts to build up. You have sensors, and your body says, okay, you need to breathe, right? And you can, practice this. So that's what deep divers, or we call free divers, do, and they can hold their breath for 4 or 5 minutes, some of them. They build up their tolerance to CO2. Now, if you do something like that, it has another effect. So it can improve your homeostasis window in other domains. So in other words, a CO2 tolerance increase can make you also more tolerant to being in an ice bath or being in a sauna for longer. That's really interesting stuff. In fact, I came across a study, it's a small study, but it was definitely very interesting, of diabetics, sorry, not diabetics, it was, I think, 14 swimmers who swam in cold water improved their insulin sensitivity. So they've exposed their bodies to cold, and it changed their blood glucose regulation for the better. So, that's really an interesting idea that maybe diabetics could use an ice bath to just help with their glucose regulation. That is super fascinating. So all this stuff is really Wolff's Law. So Wolff's Law goes something like this. A tissue responds to the stress you apply to it by improving, or conversely, to lack of stress, it atrophies, right? So this is why astronauts go off to space. They come back with bone density loss, muscle mass loss, because they're not moving through gravity. They have no stress applied to their bodies. So this thing can happen. It's a two-way street. So if you don't apply stresses to your body, you can actually become kind of fragile. So that couch potato gets more and more fragile with time because they just don't stress their body. There's a rumor, I'm not sure if this is true, but it's super interesting and kind of falls in line with this thinking, that a tree will grow flat if there's no wind. So it almost needs that resistance from the wind to grow tall. I think that's a pretty cool idea. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but basically it ties right into this line of thought. So we learn these things like Wolff's Law in school, and then it seems like we tend to forget about it. And I made kind of a strong statement earlier about wear and tear being bullshit, and that's a classic example. Sort of the common thing that you think of is, well, impact is bad for the knees, like running is bad for the knees. Well, they've done studies that the cartilage in runners is usually thicker than those that are more sedentary. Same thing with the spine. You find larger discs and larger cartilage in powerlifters who are doing heavy squats than those who don't do that. The evidence is there. We have all the science behind it, but somehow we just kind of throw that all to the wind and hang onto these relics of the past, like deadlifting is bad for your back. Your body is built to move. That's what it's supposed to do, and that's what we need to seek, especially since our environment has gotten so much easier. We don't have to hunt anymore. We don't have to deal with the elements. Life is too easy for us. So you have to kind of go out of your way to seek hard things and kill some comfort. How much is too much? That's really the question, right? Because the equation for adaptation is stress plus recovery equals adaptation. I rant about this a lot. Many of us are pretty good at applying stress. I'm not just talking about psychological stress. I'm talking about all these other things like exposure, sleep, or lack of sleep, whatever, exercise. These are all stressors. If we don't recover, that's how we know you've gone too far. So if you do a workout and you go crazy and you're sore for like a week, you've pushed too far. Sore for a day or two is reasonable. That's probably right about the right spot. But if we go ham in the gym and it takes you out, like that cost for doing that exercise is not worth the return. There are tools on the market now that you can actually track your recovery. It's pretty cool. And that's a great way to determine if the stress you've applied to yourself is adequate, right? So I use what's called a Morpheus watch. You run a little test every morning for 2 minutes, and it looks at your heart rate variability, which I'm not going to get into that. It's very complicated. But what that looks at is how well you've recovered from what you did the day before. So I use that a lot as an indicator. Did I do enough or not, or too much? So if I had a huge workout and I really pushed myself and I'm like 50% recovered, I know I went too far. I really want to shoot for that 85% mark. But the converse is true too. If you did a workout and maybe you're just going through the motions and you're 98% recovered, you didn't push yourself hard enough. So there are tools like that. Morpheus is my favorite one. I believe Oura Ring does it. And there's a couple others that can track your heart rate variability. That's a great tool if you're into the data behind all this stuff. So the bottom line is, don't beat that ship at rest. Go out, find hard things to do. Not so hard that you can't recover, but hard enough where you gain something out of it. The majority of injuries that I see, if you take out acute trauma, like if you take out a baseball bat to the leg type of trauma, the majority of issues are your tissue wasn't ready for it. You can't squat without your knees hurting because your tissue's not ready for it. Or maybe the tissue's so stiff you can't even bend your knees past 90. Maybe that's why pushing past your toes bothers you. It's just you're not ready for it. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing to do. It's something to aim for. All right? Move your body. Movement is medicine. Kill some comfort. Why guess when you can test? Do you get hangry or crash after a carb-heavy meal? These could be indicators that there is a dysfunction in your blood glucose regulation. If left unchecked, it can lead to irreversible changes. If you catch it quick enough, you can make diet and lifestyle changes that will get your levels where they need to be. 88% of Americans are pre-diabetic and don't know it. Diabetes underpins many of the pathologies we deal with in this country, such as obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. For some reason, it is rarely screened with your physician, and if they do test for blood glucose, it's usually with an A1C or a fasting glucose, which can sometimes give you a false negative. NutriSense is a company that supplies continuous glucose monitors. We've paired with NutriSense to get you real-time data to see how your physiology responds to glucose. The NutriSense app lets you track your daily activity to see how food, sleep, exercise, and stress impact your glucose. You can log or import this data into the NutriSense app to see the effect on your blood glucose levels as soon as it happens. Use the code DrChris25 for $25 off your order today. Do you have unexplained pain, or do you wonder just how healthy you are? When was the last time you had your blood tested? Blood chemistry analysis is a great tool to stay ahead of any health conditions, and now you can have control of your health with Let's Get Checked. Let's Get Checked is an incredible company that sends blood tests to your home. You can choose from over 30 different tests, whether that's thyroid function, testosterone, micronutrient, cholesterol, or C-reactive protein, which is a marker for inflammation. It is sent to you with free shipping, and you get results in 2 to 5 days. No physician referral needed. Use the code DPT25 for 25% off. You can find links in the show notes. Did you know that you can get started with physical therapy without a physician's referral? Physical therapists don't just solve pain, we get down to the root cause and keep it from coming back. We also discuss all things health, such as nutrition and lifestyle changes. If you feel that you could use some help, let's get on a free consult call. Go to www.dynamicnaples.com and sign up for a free call. Also, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us spread the message. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.